สวัสดีครับ Good morning everyone Professor Pricha Charungkit Anand Chairperson of NIDA Council Professor Tipawan Law Suwarnarat President of NIDA Distinguished speakers and participants Dear friends and colleagues, it's been quite a while since I was present at some of the events and conferences that NIDA used to organize in the past. It is really a great pleasure and most delighted to see that NIDA is moving fastly forward to be part of the global trend towards sustainable development. When I was working at the World Trade Organization and subsequently at the UN, there are two words that have been repeated times and times again. These two words are globalization and sustainability. At the WTO, I was part of the process that would like to see to it that multilateralism and globalization will work for the benefits of all participating nations. This is to distinguish it from its predecessor, the GATT, which more or less, as you probably recall, was called a rich man club. I set my sight, my goal for the task at the WTO to bring in all participants from all parts of the world to participate in our negotiations in order to build capacity to trade, in order to be able to be rid of any kind of trade distortions. I can't say that I have been fully successful, but in the 3 years, I thought we have gone a little bit further to engage all countries in the multilateral system. At the UN, I was actually challenged from the beginning with the thought that globalization, whether it would be able to provide the kind of equitable benefits for everyone concerned. At my own institution, UNCTAD, my colleagues have always been quite, to say the least, skeptical of globalization. As head of the United Nations, Secretary General Kofi Annan, I recall, always reminded us of the fact that globalization, the terms that he used, I can't replicate here exactly, but what I recall was that he said globalization should not lift all boats, should lift all boats, and not only the expensive yokes. Because he was afraid that the tides of globalization would sink some of the smaller boats. So he kept saying that all the time to us. And he kept repeating to us also that in order for the UN to be able to be part of the process of, I would say, development center globalization, he said, we are the voice of the voiceless. we are the voice of the voiceless. We don't work for Wall Street. We work for people who have no streets to walk on. So, I mean, from one side, globalization, multilateralism, free trade, into another side of sustainability of globalization in a way that, as you probably recognize, that it should include economic, social, and environmental achievement at the same time. So, I am very pleased to have heard the clips that Professor Tipawan talked about her vision of NIDA. To try to forge NIDA to present the wisdom for sustainable development. And for NIDA also to participate with all universities around the world, which the UN has been requested, to help promote the principles of Agenda 2030, the Agenda for Sustainable Development. And the kind of participation by universities around the world. If I say we, I am trying to position myself as partly still part of the UN. We were expecting the higher education, higher institutions for higher educations would be able to be part of the Agenda 2030 to instill the sense of understanding and deep commitment to the global development process, which the UN has not always been very successful at. I was part of the first Millennium Development Goal. And as you probably recall, the Millennium Development Goal was not actually produced by the development section of the UN. If I complain a little bit about the work at the UN, please bear with me because I've been involved with it so much. The economic development part of the UN was not very much involved. This is my own personal criticism in the Millennium Development Goal. The MDGs were mainly directed at social goals. At that time, in those days, we were told that economic goals, economic activities are already adequately practiced at the World Bank and at the International Monetary Fund. So, well, more or less, UN just have to tag along. And my UNCTAD, which I try to steer it into a more independent way so that we can raise our voice. So UNCTAD has always later on become not only the voice of the voiceless, but also for the unconventional thinking, which we are very proud of. Unconventional thinking. Unconventional thinking doesn't mean that we disagree with everything. It means that we want the way the world is being governed to be differently performed than before, when it was only one-sided, one-way street. We want it to be two-way, multiple-way street, wherein all participants can participate. That's why, at the end of the MDGs in 2020, sorry, I can't remember exactly, 2020 something, 2013 or something. I'm sorry, I'm not at the moment sure of the end. But when we came to the origin of the Agenda 2030, it was because of the discontent with the substance of the MDGs. So that's why we put in as one of the most important goals into the Sustainable Development Goals, many goals are important, as Professor Tipawan has already alluded to. But one of the most important goals is goal number 10, which is to offer the kind of participation, the partnership for development. That when we talk about development, it's not only the developing countries themselves. Of course, they have to be responsible for their own economic and social development. But for the global community to succeed in pushing for SDGs, for these goals, we need partnership from the developing countries for their own sake, and also for the development side of the equation, which is equally responsible for the things in the past that has not always been the benefits of the poorer countries. So that's why goal number 10 to me lies very deep in the heart, and that is one of the goals that we push very much from UNCTAD side. Because we saw that in order to have a global governance that would be able to reimagine, re-engineer, regenerate globalization in a way that it would reflect the pathway for development, we need to have participation at the decision-making level for all of the nations, all the people concerned. I have already alluded to the dissatisfaction at UNCTAD with the process of globalization. I would say that globalization, in my days when I started work at UNCTAD in 2005 until 2013, that we have been seeing quite a purple patch of globalization. Those were some of the better days when we saw trade increase, and particularly trade with some of the poorest nations in the world, in Africa and also in Asia, throughout the world. It's been increasing. And trade among the South has been increasing even more exponentially than the trade in general. It was the days that I thought we have actually turned around the kind of development process that was one way. When we say you have to own the process of development and development policy, it means that the countries must be responsible for their own policies. Think about the policies, research, execute themselves, and not just being held hands and guided forward or being led by other supposedly more knowledgeable countries or more developed countries. So I would summarize in just a few sentences of why we are dissatisfied with the globalization process at UNCTAD in those days. First, because UNCTAD came from the first Secretary General, who actually has presented to us the concept of center periphery. I don't know whether you still recall this word. Center periphery. And the center and periphery thing was not only the catalytic force in the old colonial days, when the center absorbed everything from the peripheral and left nothing to the periphery. But in the modern day of globalization, we saw that the center periphery thought and process still operating. Secondly, we have been a little bit concerned that the process of globalization is moving forward so rapidly, in a way that poorer country may not be able to catch up with it and will be left behind. We call it hyper-globalization. So, globalization will have its own positive and negative implications. On the trade side, some positive when people can trade, some negative when constraints are put up, trade restrictions are put up. On the negative side, globalization has not brought about equality around the world, may not have brought about prosperity to all concerned. The 5 Ps that the Agenda 2030 refer to may not be fulfilled all the time. I like the remarks that have been made by President Xi Jinping of China very much at the Davos meeting in 2017. It was the first time that President of China participated at all at the World Economic Forum in Davos. It was the first time. President Xi Jinping was there, and he was discussing the process of globalization. It was a surprise to see that he was quoting from Charles Dickens. And this was a quote. It was the best of time, it was the worst of time. It was the worst of time, it was the best of time, it was the worst of time. Charles Dickens wrote this in the aftermath of the Industrial Revolution, which has brought about prosperity, but at the same time also poverty and vulnerable people in the world. But President Xi Jinping actually said that because he was presenting his ideas to the world that we have to be satisfied partly with globalization because it has brought about economic growth, better health for all people around, the way we can tackle difficult issues together. But at the same time, we have to recognize the negative part of globalization as well. But don't let the negative part overrule the positive parts. He discussed actually 3 critical issues at the Davos meeting. One, he was concerned with the lack of economic growth at the global level. In those days, we still have the impact of the global recession from 2008, 2009. So it was the first critical issue that President Xi referred to, slow pace of growth. Secondly, he mentioned inadequate global economic governance. This is so close to the heart of UN and so close to the heart of UNCTAD. Because we have mentioned it all along, that because of the deficiency in global economic governance, we cannot see to it the global equality would be achieved without fully functional global economic governance. This is the second point that President Xi Jinping mentioned there. The third point, he was mentioning global inequality. And this is, of course, related to the second point that I have already mentioned. So, with that kind of perspective and the increasing level of dissatisfaction with the global economic development, I can see that people around the world has become disenchanted with globalization. When war came in Ukraine, the world actually was drifting apart again. So globalization was not served with that. When the US government walked away from the WTO meeting to appoint members of the appellate body to do the judging on some of the disputes on trade issues, when the US disagreed in appointing the new judges of the appellate body, it meant that the WTO actually was not able to walk on the two legs of multiple trading system and also on the leg of being the guardian of the system. The process of deglobalization, as people were concerned, are still concerned, has not been helped with the economic hostility between the G2 of the world today. The G2 of the world today are United States and China. And this is the key issue. If we have to re-globalize the world, not only do we need a decent global economic governance, particularly at the UN level, we also need a G2 to be able to reconcile the economic hostilities and not to let the economic hostilities spill over into a more physical hostilities that none of us will be able to benefit. Another good friend of mine, although he's much more senior than me, is Henry Kissinger. Good friend because when I was running for the Director General of the World Trade Organization, he put in some nice words for me to help lend me some support at the time that I was denied some support by some of the advanced economy. Kissinger supported me in everything he could do and wrote me several letters in support of myself. He was in Beijing this year, not so long ago, I think around about the month of July. He's now more than 100 years old, but still very sharp mind and very committed to globalization and multilateralism. He said a lot of nice things there, which I would like to quote. One thing, one passage, because this actually emphasized the G2 reconciliation that I would like to emphasize very much, to promote it. He said, and I quote, "Neither the United States nor China can afford to treat the other as an adversary. If the two countries go to war, it will not lead to any meaningful resolve for the two peoples." Unquote. So, I would say that we're not going to see the end of globalization. Globalization driven by endogenous factors like economic policies may be slowing down because countries around the world these days are looking more inward. We are so much bogged down with the problems in our own areas, in our own countries, that we tend to pay more attention to problems close at home. Like what they say, charity begins at home. But we're not seeing the demise of globalization. Some of my colleagues talk about globalization. The fast speed, exponential speed of globalization is now turning into a slow speed for globalization. So it's still moving on, but slowing down a little bit. What I see is that the exogenous factors, unlike the endogenous factors of economic policies, but the exogenous factors, the way we are linked more and more to cultural means, to creative economies, as we said, and the more and more we are linked to technology, that will always drive us to be together all the time. To be together all the time. I had a friend who was hiking in Tibet, and he told me that he met a group of monks in Tibet, in the far up high mountains of Tibet. He said he saw all these monks, Tibetan monks, all clutching their mobile phones and speaking to their mobile phones all the time. So that was an epiphany for them, epiphany for this person, and he told me that. So even in the remotest part of the world, we are connected. Beginning of this year, at the biennial in Venice, biennial in Venice, you probably have heard of it. It's called Venice Architecture Biennial. What actually turned out to be the exposition of Western civilization. It turns out to be an amalgamation of civilization from various parts of the world. The way we build our homes, the way we build our institutions, the way we build our palaces, our habitat, was presented at the Venice Biennial this year. And people report to me, I was told, that in spite of the fragmentation around the world, multipolar world, we are seeing a world which is moving away from what they say was an exclusive predomination by some parts of the world only. Because the architectural advance that we are seeing these days moves in all directions, west, east, north, south. And so it was again another epiphany to see that we should celebrate our collective departure from only some false unilateralism from whatever part. It was false. It's not supposed to be so. But this is part of the picture. This is from the cultural side. I call it exogenous. Because it's not driven by only economic policies alone. But this is an enlightened move towards multiplurality, polarity, multipolar world, which is something which we all wish for. In China again, at the summer Davos, I'm very closely involved with the Davos meetings all the time and throughout all these decades. At summer Davos this year, which always take place in China, in Tianjin, I was pleased to hear that the Chinese Prime Minister, if I pronounce correctly, Prime Minister Li Qiang, he's a very absolutely correct in being business friendly. And at that summer Davos, Premier Li Qiang convinced participating businessmen around the world to abandon all thoughts of decoupling and de-risking. Some of my colleagues in the Western world would discuss a lot of decoupling because they want to have their own direction being taken up to move forward and not to be able to cater for other directions. At the, I think, Hiroshima summit of G7, this year also, Hiroshima summit, our friends from the advanced world, 7 countries, talk about de-risking. De-risking, decoupling are terms that do not serve globalization very well. But the Premier Li Qiang, who is talking, convincing businessmen in that Davos meeting to actually abandon all thoughts of decoupling and de-risking. I think this is a positive factor. I have only a few minutes more to conclude by giving my own thoughts as to how we can reconstruct the part of globalization. I would try to be as brief as possible. To my mind, this process of globalization, slow pace of globalization, will be time that we can adjust ourselves to the global ills. So I would call this process not really, well, I'm not disagreeing with NIDA, with re-globalization, but I would call this a new generation of globalization. Regenerate globalization, a new generation globalization, wherein globalizing is not about integrating alone. We're not going to integrate you there and everywhere in the world to be together. Maybe you don't want to be integrated, but we want all the world to be connected. So I would say connectivity. Connectivity is the kind of key word for the new generation of globalization. And this connectivity, my first point that I would like to make is that it would have to come with inclusiveness, sustainability, and resilience. Resilience. We already understand inclusive. Everyone has to be taken on board. Participation by all parts, I talked to. Sustainability, we understand. But to be resilient, people will have to understand the economic sufficiency principle of our King Rama IX, far better than what we do at the moment. Because we tend to go in extremes in all parts. We tend to go to extremes. When we are negative, we are too negative. Positive, we are too positive. But economic sufficiency principle tells us to always stay calm, be conscious in the middle of things, and to be resilient at all time. This is another key word that I would like to leave with my first point of reconstructing globalization. When we do sustainability, we need resilience. We have to stand up to all the adversities. You look at the way nearly the whole villages, the whole town was destroyed on the island of Maui in Hawaii by forest fires. We see our forest fires around the world. We see pandemics around the world. We see all kinds of environmental destructions, that we need to be so resilient. Not resilient in the way that we have to come back again to fight another day, but to be resilient in a way that we have to prevent all these things from happening. So my first point is about these things. Inclusiveness, resilience, and sustainability will have to go together. Just again this year, I was told that there are 60 signatories from 60 countries around the world sent to the UN to remind the UN that this year we are seeing simultaneous increase in global poverty together with the global inequality. 50% of the world's wealth is owned by just 10% of the richest people. 50% of the global wealth. Whereas 50% of the global poor owns only 8% of the global wealth. This is the year. My second point is about reshoring and offshoring. Since the pandemic, we talked about reshoring and not offshoring. I just give you a brief remark to say that my colleague at the moment, Ngozi, the President Director General of the World Trade Organization, just said the other day that we need to try to strengthen supply chain again. Not to reshoring, but to strengthen offshoring. And I would agree wholeheartedly with her. I mentioned one thing. The production of a dose of Pfizer medicine. To produce one dose of Pfizer medicine, we have to source for 260 ingredients from around the world. 260 ingredients to produce one dose of Pfizer vaccine against COVID-19. This is clearly a world that is connected and will have to remain connected if we want to stay resilient away from all the adversities. The third point is about technological globalization, and just a few minutes more. Technological globalization is exogenous. We're not at the moment not able to control it in a way that we are seeing now a runaway sort of advancement in, for example, in robotics, in artificial intelligence. I have received articles after articles from around the world from tech people to explain their concerns that we cannot let the process of AI technology to rule over the world. Shortly, in brief terms, AI should not be allowed to take over the world from human beings, but AI should be, how would I say, apply to be made use of to enhance human lives around the world, in public health, in global ecological balance, in trying to promote smart farming and things like that. So AI at the moment, I have colleagues in the tech area who told me that the AI industries is trying to get together to produce some rules and regulation that would try to pace down. I have colleagues who are pessimistic with this one, with this effort, because they say that industries like technology industries will not be able to have self-regulation. We have to get government to be involved. So I hope that the fifth industrial revolution will not be exogenous, but will be part of the endogeneity that could be driven by policies to sustain the sustainability goal. Number four, just one small remark with geopolitics. These days, your economics are overwhelmed, surpassed by the predominance geopolitics. My recommendation is that we need to blend the two. For example, in the South China Sea, global politics should not be allowed to drift into something that could become a physical hostilities in South China Sea. At the UN, we have been trying to advise East Asia. You have to use more of geoeconomics in a way that under the sea, the marine biology, the way that we need to do the research together, can drive forward the geoeconomics. Maybe cannot actually obliterate geopolitical movements, elements, but can at least help to bring people together so that for a while we may be able to solve geopolitics gradually by allowing more prominent roles of geoeconomics. My last point is about localization and globalization. We will have localization anywhere. People have to be able to help themselves, for example, with the producing of their own pharmaceutical services, medicine, vaccine. But we should always say that, or direct localization in a way that localization doesn't mean something which is taking away from globalization. Localization should mean that we enhance education, we improve education in our areas, we build up infrastructure in our area. We promote localization because people are more productive. We use technology to help that. But that will not take away and should not take away from globalization. So I want localization and globalization to be able to rhyme together so that we would have, well, if I can use NIDA's word of re-globalization, but my own word will be the new generation of globalization would take everyone on board. Thank you very much for your attention.